Well, hello. It's great to be here this year. I'm Ness Bosch. For those that don't know me, I'm a priestess, I'm a shamaness, I'm a witch. I'm the head of the goddess temple Alba and the temple of Astarte. And I'm also the founder of the Covenant of the Waters. And I walk the path of the bones. I'm a Westera. I'm a bone woman, and bones are kind of my thing. And today I'm going to be sharing a talk. Um, I it's called Sacred Bones, ancient bone magic and living practices. So as I said, um, I'm a Westera. I'm a Spanish. That's a Spanish word, and it literally means bone woman. Uh, and I walk a spiritual path that came to me as the path of the bones, and this is very much uh, a path about connection with ancestors and working with ancestors and the spirit world. So, but why bones? Well, for me, bones are a way to connect. To start with, they're a way to connect with the ancestors, and well, we are bones as well. It's not like they're alien from us. I actually have broken a few bones myself. I don't know about yourselves, but I think we only become conscious of our bones when we break them. That's when we become more conscious of them. But so we used to see skeletons, in cartoons. I watch a lot of cartoons. In movies, obviously, when we closer to Halloween, it's all about skulls and skeletons and bones, and and we can literally see bones everywhere. But bones are very much part of our lives, and bone magic is nothing new, not at all. It's actually um, a very, very ancient practice, when our ancestors practice ceremonies around the cult of death, and the death ones. So we have I'm going to give you I'm going to try in the short time we have to give you an overview about some bone practices in antiquity, and we're going to talk about living practices, living traditions that still work with bones. So as I said, bone spirituality is very much goes very much around death, the cult of death, the cult of the ancestors, and the first humans to actually um, develop ritual practices, uh, as we know now, because what we know now can change tomorrow, were the Neanderthals, okay? And we believe they were the first ones to kind of establish, this practice, this belief system where they believe in the underworld or the other world. And obviously from those practices, they arise, they become more complex. So deities related to death or the cult of death arise in many different geographies, and obviously the communication with death becomes a very important matter. And this communication with the other worlds or the underworld or the other side of the veil, okay, is so important that rituals are developed around this trying to open a gate of communication with the death. Okay, and this is when the figure of the necromancer kind of appears as a facilitator of the communication between the death and the living. Okay, so there was a lot of controversy about were there shamans in the prehistory. Well, I think we're getting closer to 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 know that yes, obviously there were these rituals, okay, and from these very ancient practices, okay, these animistic practices with time evolve. Okay, so we do know that there were some religious practices around bones because they for example, they found skulls that were manipulated, or they were painted with ochre, or they were literally trying to be reconstructed, trying to show the features, we think, or people, scholars think, archaeologists think, trying to reconstruct the features of the person. And they try to replace the eyes and built up kind of the face again. So because of these discoveries, okay, we do believe there was ritual so far in history, okay, in prehistory. So moving in the history line, okay, one of the most important bones in antiquity were the astragalus, okay, and the astragalus is literally a bone that is the lower part of the ankle, and because of this bone we can actually walk and stand. So it is a very important bone for us. Okay, so in antiquity, this bone, people use these bones as a game. It was a very popular game, not only for children. Okay, people of every single social stratus will play with their strugglers through the Mediterranean, from Egypt to the Middle East, Greece, but then Italy, the Iberian Peninsula, the north of Africa, of Morocco or Algeria. So they have found strugglers all over the place. So they were very important bones. And they also believe that the origin of this, let's say, game started in Egypt, and that was the god Thoth himself that invented this game. But this is, the astragalus, but was not just a game, because we know, when you research, you find information about people actually using the bones for as an oracle. And they have been found in caves, in sanctuaries, near temples. So we know, because of that, the astragalus, this very, very special bone, was linked to the sacred in antiquity. Okay. And we know that these bones, because of the amount, they found some burials with like a silly amount of stragglers. So they also talk about the social status of the person. But going back to, because I already mentioned necromancy and the possibility of the first shamans in prehistory of being necromancers, because necromancy is actually was a very important practice in antiquity, the art of talking to the dead. But why is necromancy so important in antiquity? Because obviously there was this belief that the dead could access a knowledge and information that was important. Okay, so talking to the dead, by opening this door to talk to the dead, you actually open a door to higher knowledge and information that could be of the use of the living. Okay, so we actually, although the word necromancy, okay, comes from the Greek necromanteia, it's a Greek word. The first necromancers were actually from ancient Babylon, and we actually find in Babylon the first references of trying to talk to ghosts and the death. But then this practice, it kind of arrived, it moved towards Greece, okay, and then we find very important people from ancient Greece that were necromancers. For example, Pythagoras, Aristeas, and Epimenides were some of them. Most of people maybe know Pythagoras because he's because of the mathematics, and he was all about mathematics. But they were necromancers because they actually perform these practices. Actually, we can find in some treaties that they were called Greek shamans as well. So it's all to do with animistic, again connecting to the ancient cults of death. It's a very shamanic practice. Okay. So we find in antiquity, we find references to necromancy in philosophy treatises, but we actually find I think one of the best explanations about the practices in literature. We find them in classic literature. For example, in Homer's Odyssey, okay, we find how Odysseus seeks the help of Circe, or Circe in Spanish, to be able to perform a necromantic ritual to communicate with the soul of someone that died. So we find in a lot of classical literature, we find necromantic rituals. We find references to witches, very famous witches and ugly witches like Erectu, that practice. She was a necromancer. She used to roam the cemeteries and things like that. But yes, necromancy in resume was a very important practice, and we can actually we can divide we can say that necromancy had two basic uses. Okay, so we can find kind of sympathetic necromancy, where the person that does the ritual, that holds the ritual, has an emotional bond with with the dead, and that's why they want to perform this ritual, because they want to reconnect with the soul of the person they lost. But we also find beneficial necromancy, when the person that practices is doing this ritual literally just wants to call the spirit with the sole intention of gathering knowledge and information for personal benefit. Okay, so normally necromancy was something that it will be practiced in secret, although we do have references of public necromantic rituals performed by some of these philosophers in big cities like in Athens, or with people being witness of the ritual. But we also find references of necromantic rituals performed in caves. Okay, and in private. I mean, for example, my father will take a Ouija board to communicate with my grandma when I was little. And I think I was around 5, and literally I will sit on the table with my dad and talk with my grandma the same way you pick up the phone. My dad will just bring the Ouija board to the table, and we just phoned grandma. And obviously we did this in private. So when you speak to the death is something that in antiquity also it was tend to be done in private. Okay, so we have different places where the necromantic rituals will be performed in antiquity. Some of these places, for example, cemeteries, we find references about the cemeteries. I already mentioned Erictio, the witch that roamed the cemeteries. Also in private households, obviously. But another place where they will perform necromantic rituals will be the battlefields, for the obvious reason that there was a lot of dead people, or there were a lot of dead people in that battlefield. Okay, so to continue briefly with this resume about necromancy as one of a very important practice that relates to bones and the death. Some of the elements will be purification, libations, sacrifices were also part of the necromantic ritual. Prayers were also important, as well as movement. Even dance could be part of a necromantic ritual. Obviously, a very important point if you are performing a necromantic ritual is the ability of the person to manage their spirit, okay, and the technologies, the ancient technologies for the management of their spirit. were very, very important. We also find references of bowls, and we also find references of the use of dolls, and also estues, or we dolls made of wax. Okay. And we also find references to rings used in the necromantic practices. And also there is no basic etiquette, like how do you need to dress to perform a necromantic ritual, but black is kind of the main color. And I know I'm talking about the practice of necromancy in antiquity, but necromancy is still lives now. There's still people now that practices necromancy. Okay. Then obviously we move again in the timeline, and we have then we find bones. Well, I find bones always near me. I have bones all over my house in different places. We find references to bones in grimoires from antiquity, and also grimoires from all through the Middle Ages, going to the modern times. We find references of bones, for example, in the Greek magical papyri, okay, and the Testament of Solomon. And then we move, and we find references to bones and death, and the sword of Moses, Hygromanteia, and then go on up to 28 grimoires that talk about the use of bones. So very, very important. Also, bones are very important, not also in antiquity, but also through the Middle Ages, and different magical practices in the Middle Ages. So we find in the grimoires, we find the references to these bones. They either relate to the quality of the animal, or relate to the quality of the person they belong to. So we find that the magic that relates to bones in grimoires is actually kind of a sympathetic magic, in the different spells. So it is very curious to read the different rituals, and how they use the finger of of a person that stole something certain day. It's so very curious. But as I said, there are still people today that work with bones. There is actually a fascinating tradition from Japan that is called kotsuage. I don't know if I don't speak Japanese, so I don't know if I just said this right. But the kotsuage is a tradition that actually both people from the Shinto tradition and the Buddhist tradition practice this. It kind of is practiced by both of the main religions in Japan. So this tradition consists, once the body of the person is cremated, okay, they actually do the cremation at a very specific temperature, so the bones remain intact. Okay, so once the flesh of the person has been turned into ashes, two members of the family, male and woman, enter the room, and they actually pick up every single bone of the person in order from the feet. And they have this special base, and they pick up every single bone from the toes, from the very bottom bone in our body, every single bone in order, and they, with chopsticks, yeah, I know, and they put every single bone in this jar, okay, in order. There is one bone that doesn't go into this big jar, and is the thymus, okay, because they actually keep the thymus for the last. So they put all the bones inside, and then they kind of crown the skeleton of their relative with the thymus, because they believe that is a very sacred bone, and it kind of seals the rest of the bones inside of this recipient. And then they take the recipient to home, to their home altar, and they worship this ancestor, they make offerings, they pray to this ancestor for certain days. And this is something that they do today, okay. And it has not changed in maybe centuries. So we have more people apart from Japanese people that still work with bows. Obviously, we have traditions, like where indigenous people still worship their ancestors and still use bones. Indigenous people in different geographies around the planet. Obviously, we also have in North America, we have root workers, we have modern necromancers, we have shamans, and druids and foragers that roam the forest, that still work with bones in an animistic way to connect with the spirit of the animal. And as a shaman myself, bones, as I mentioned at the beginning, are a very, very important part of my path, which that's the path I share with other people, and the shamanic practices that I share with other people. I put them under the umbrella of the path of the bones. In the path of the bones, I already mentioned, it's very, for me, it's very important to talk and commune and work with the ancestors, and there are ways to do so. But also for me, working with spirit animals and totems are, is very important. And one of the ways I communicate with animals is through bones, and I have different rituals for many different purposes. That you need a wee bone to do the ritual. So my book, Sacred Bones, Magic Bones, it's actually in production, yet to be published. But my book literally is just full of bones and stories from the path of the bones, stories that belong to us as a collective, as humanity, as they connect with the ancestors of all of us, and stories, that are universal, folklore. I actually, obviously, here in the UK, you have the Tooth Fairy, in Spain and other Spanish speaking countries, we have a mouse, the raton Perez, the Perez mouse. But actually, there are other countries going towards the east of Europe that they also connect the teeth with the mouse. And so there in the book, in my book, you're gonna find stories, you're gonna find folklore, you're gonna find a little bit of anthropology, and obviously there is a practical part. There is one the book is divided in two parts, and the second part is all about practice. And there you're gonna find the different spells. I actually have let me so I'm just going to share with you. So this is the bottom part of the jaw of a badger, and I actually use this for a protection spell, to protect your home. And there is also a very fascinating spell to work with the energy, to work with the spirit of the seagulls, because they are very good getting things. But in my book, I also give an example of first a shamanic journey, to work with the ancestors and to actually meet the ancestors. And everyone that wants to try to do the practice, all they need to do is to learn the practice, to have the information clear, and try. So it's very, very practical. And obviously, being a priestess, I also talk about deities. I talk about deities that relate to bones, because actually I'm very close to two deities that in their mythology, in their folklore, in their stories, we find references to bones. One of them, like one of my favorite ones, and I actually met her when I was little. I found her in a book that had some stories from the east of Europe, and that deity is Baba Yaga. And yes, she's a witch. She's a babushka, and but I strongly believe she became a witch closer, through the Middle Ages, when because of fear, because she was obviously a powerful healer, and she had a lot of knowledge. But some scholars do actually believe that the origin of Baba Yaga is a very ancient deity. We're talking again, we're going back to the prehistory, okay? She might be related to a prehistoric deity that of the underworld, okay, of the other world. So she is probably a goddess of death, and she evolved through time into this witch, Baba Yaga. But we can still find the references about bones in her stories. She has this hat, very funny hat with that runs around with chicken legs, and her land has a fence made of bones, and she has human skulls also, hanging there. And to me, she is a goddess. She is perhaps one of the most important goddesses in Europe. And I talk about her a lot in my book, in the chapter dedicated to deities. Another deity that is a favorite of mine that relates to bones is the Cailleach. And we find a story about a friar and a younger guy that goes to visit the Cailleach, and I, the Cailleach, they ask her, "How old are you?" And the Cailleach said, "Well, I've been slaughtering a cow since I became of age, and I've been keeping one bone every year." So this younger fella goes upstairs to count the bones, to find out how old was the Cailleach. And at the end, he's still counting, and he counted half of the bones, and he was nowhere near of knowing how old the Cailleach was. So we do find these references of bones. We also find, obviously, references to bones when it comes to archaeology, and when it comes to studying ancient sites and of cult in antiquity, because we find the deposit of bones from sacrifices. So actually, we find deities that relate to bones, because we find bones of the sacrifices they received in antiquity. We find, for example, there are two goddesses. Actually, I think there's a third one, but it's escaping my mind now. We found the ancient goddess Bao from Sumeria, and goddess Hecate. We find dog bones in the relating to their cult. We also find a story that relates to, well, we find many stories with bones in antiquity. But for example, we have the story, I think, was Prometheus and Theus, that talks about how he tries to, he puts some bones inside of the fur of the animal and give the bones to Zeus, and he gives the best part of the sacrifice to humans, and Zeus, punishes him. But we also find deities in India that we can clearly see, either they have a skull on their feet, or they have a garland or necklace with the skulls. We find deities that relate to the cult of death, and bones and skeletons in Mexico. We actually find deities that relate to bones everywhere. Even we could say that one of the when I was researching about the folklore of bones and the uses of bones, also now, contemporary also uses for bones, I came across the Inuit traditions, and how they work the bones. They do art that they sell, and obviously I could also link the story of Setna, when her father, literally, poor Setna, her father cuts her fingers, and they fall in the ocean, and from her fingers, we have all these sea creatures being born from her fingers. But another very interesting place where we find spiritual work spiritual practices relating to bones is in ancient China. And even nowadays, bones are very important in some practices, even in Chinese medicine. Um, I don't know if you have heard about dragon bones in Chinese medicine. If you read my book, you're gonna find a small resume about the practice. But obviously, there were not real dragon bones, but the bones of some dinosaurs, and they believe those bones had medicinal properties, and you can still buy um, the remedy dragon bones and the different shades, because there are different shades of this dragon bone powder. You can still go to a Chinese doctor and get prescribed um, dragon bones. But we also find references to the use of bone in medicine in some ancient in some grimoires from the Middle Ages. And for example, I remember one that literally told you to pulverize the bone. If you hurt yourself, you have to pulverize the bone on and create like a paste and just cover um, your hurt with that paste made with bones. So bones have never really stopped being important in spiritual practices. And but maybe we see this more clear in the practices that arose from the result of the African diaspora in America, from the different practices that uh, arose from the African diaspora. So like hoodoo, voodoo, spiritualists, because there is also the spiritualist church, and the Ovea. But obviously, if these practices that arose from from the heritage that came from Africa, obviously, indigenous people in Africa, different peoples, tribes, will still use bones in their practices. For example, in South Africa, we can still find Sangoma healers that use use bones in their spells, or either for the oracles, or actually bone oracles were very, very important in these practices that were born from the African diaspora. The reading the bones, casting the bones, was a very, very important part of one of the legacy of these African traditions that arrives to the Americas. I actually create oracles, and I teach my students how to create their own oracle using bones, but actually also using shells, because shells are bones, exoskeletons of crustaceans. So I normally, when I go to the sea, you will struggle to see me just looking around randomly. I'm always looking down, trying to find treasures on the beach. I'm always sea combing, and I never go to the sea without taking a shell or sea glass or treasures that I find, and sometimes with those treasures, I do create oracles. It's all about giving every single element a meaning for you, and then developing ways to read those symbols that you create with the elements you find. And these and a lot more, you find it in the practical section of my book. I don't know if anyone, I think Rachel mentioned that we were going to have some time for questions. I don't know if it's happening or not, but I can actually see I can see some comments here. I don't know how to read. I think I might need some help from Rachel. I don't know if I can see the. I see something in my screen, but I don't know. I can see the whole thing well, but if you are one of us that still uses bones in your practice, or you're curious to learn about how humanity, how we carry on using bones in our religious practices and rituals and everything. I think you will find in my book a lot of information, and you will find it interesting. And hopefully, I'm actually still waiting to know when it's going to be out, because it's a bit long, not too long, but it's a bit long, so it's still in production, and there's work behind. There's a lot of work in a book before you can actually hold it, and so I'm waiting. I'm still waiting to know when it's going to be out, but I'm actually working in other projects. One of them, Rachel Patterson, is going to be contributing as well, and other Moon Books authors. And I'm also, as you know, well, some people might know, sharing. I'm going to be sharing like on a regular basis in a shamanic magazine. So if you're curious about the shamanic path, my shamanic path of the bones, and you're curious to learn, little things here and there, I will share on my social media all the information about that. I know some people know, but I can't remember now. I have to share it. So I think that's more or less what I wanted to share with you. I hope it was interesting for some of you. I know bones is not something everybody works with, but yes, there is, we are a lot of people out there that work with bones. One of my favorite things perhaps is actually when I go to the forest, I go to the mountains, I go to the wild, is actually, I always hope to find bones. I do. Because for me, if I find bones at night in nature, is such a gift from their spirits, because that means I'm going to be able to connect with the spirit of that animal and also the spirit of that place where I found that bone. And I know other people that go to the wild foraging, not only for food or mushrooms, but also for bones. So yeah, we might be a bigger club than you think. And it is nothing wrong to work with with bones that you find in the wild. Or I actually also keep the bones of when I cook. If it's, if I'm making a soup or something and I see a nice bone, I always pick it up and I keep it. Actually, uh, this is marrow um, and I kept these from. I made a broth for my children, and I always keep the bones that I think are pretty. But for me, every single bone is pretty. There's no bone ugly for me. But yes, there you can source the bones in nature, um, but you can also obviously keep the bones. If you eat meat and you cook and there is a bone, you can also keep it. For example, this bone I'm holding here, and it's a lovely wee bone from the wing of a duck. And I cooked that duck for Christmas, and I say I'm gonna keep that bone because I like it. So um, obviously, you can also find online, obviously, shops and different shops where you can actually also buy bones now if you want. And there's nothing wrong with buying bones. Um, if you can always cleanse the bone before you use it for your practice, so it's nothing wrong about buying bones. As I said, there are quite a few shops where you can find bones now. Obviously, if you find it in nature, for me is more special. And I don't only find bones, for example, in the forest, but when I go to the seaside, I've been lucky. I've been lucky enough to find bones by the sea of seagulls and other animals, and I always bring them home like a treasure, because I include them in my practice, in my rituals. So I think um, I think this is what I wanted to share, a bit about my book, Sacred Bones, Magic Bones, a bit about my practice, and I hope at least you are curious to learn about the connections of bones and or spirituality as humanity. So I hope you enjoyed this, and let's see if it's anyone that wants to. I don't know, Rachel, are there any questions? Because I saw something, but I couldn't really read it. Rachel's a superstar. She's been working so hard all day, and she still has a while to go. So thank you, Rachel, for facilitating this for us Moon Books authors to share with the world.